Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Precision Ag Insight webinar on the tools and techniques for collecting and analyzing yield data, hosted by XSInc. I'm Ben Giss, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to begin by just going over a few logistics for how you guys can ask questions during the webinar. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an area where you can ask questions during the presentation. We'll do our best to get to all of them, but if we don't get to yours, we'll reply in an email at the conclusion of the presentation. In addition, during the webinar, if you guys have any technical difficulties, you can type those questions in the same window, and we'll address those as they come in. So I'd like to begin now by introducing our presenter today, Dr. Chad Godsey. Chad was a professor at Oklahoma State's Plant and Soil Sciences Department for 7 years before he started his own crop consulting company. Godsey Precision Ag was founded so Chad could take university research and new precision technologies to increase his growers' crop input efficiencies and their overall profitability. So I'll go ahead and turn over the talk to Chad now.
All right, thank you, Ben. Like Ben indicated, thank you for everybody taking time this morning to join us, and please don't hesitate to type in questions as we go along this morning, and we'll try to get them answered. All right, just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today, and then I kind of consider this my season-long data checklist, I guess you can say. Mark this off at the beginning of the season. And some of you are already in harvest season or just got started. I actually did my first wet corn calibration yesterday morning, so it was a good refresher putting some of this information together, a good reminder. Just a quick overview: collecting yield data. Second step, of course, cleaning that yield data. Third step, initial interpretation of that yield data. And then we'll spend a few minutes at the end talking about some of the advanced phases of interpreting that data, especially some of the analytical tools that we have now available that kind of takes us to that next step of using yield data. You know, all of us know the importance of yield data. Most of our clients or producers make decisions with yield data, and it basically can be broken down into 5 steps. The 2 things we're going to focus on today is the collecting the data and interpreting the data. Basically, yield data, you know, in this 5-step process, yield data is used in, of course, collecting the data and evaluating the results. So we can see that yield data is a vital part of this, what I would call this precision ag process. 3 steps easily be broken down into 3 steps of data collection, calibration being the first, 2nd data management, and then 3 data cleaning. We'll spend a few minutes talking about the cleaning process and some of the steps that I usually go through when we collect harvest data at the end of the year. Just to provide you guys some input or feedback on some of the questions that you answered during registration, we'll break up the presentation today using some of these questions. First one you guys answered was, how often do you or your clients generally calibrate either your or their yield monitors? And I was quite surprised on the response. 44% said at the beginning of each harvest season, which is what's always recommended. Actually, there was a large, almost half the responses indicated a couple of times during the harvest season. So this was good as well. This kind of surprised me. Then a few percentage of you said every few days or more than once a day. For that 1%. That does it more than once a day, I'd say, man, that's great, and no doubt you're getting good yield data. All right, when we step back and look at the importance of the calibration, I mean, everybody knows that it's important. This is just an example of what I ran into. I believe this was last year when I was starting out creating a variable rate seeding prescription, and I wanted to do a multi-year yield analysis on it. And I had kind of inherited all this for 4 years of yield data prior to 2014, and I had no background on the data. It was kind of just given to me on a card or shape files, and that's how I got it. It turned out that we had 2012. There was a plot test plot, a hybrid corn test plot that went through this field, and it only harvested 6 of 12 possible rows. So the yield data was skewed, was way off in this area. And so I didn't really, actually it was by luck that I caught it because I knew the field so well. But you can see where instances where that yield data is not cleaned, where down the road, not necessarily this year, but maybe 3 years from now, it may cause problems and it may go undetected. So the importance of calibration and cleaning that data, vital. Just want to spend a few minutes talking about the calibration process. You know, most of you guys are probably familiar with the calibration process, but it's always good to have a little bit of reminder, refresher. And simply the calibration process is just simply fitting a response curve between grain flow rate and flow sensor signal strength in order to estimate yields, so that you can basically break things down into 2 different calibration curves, if you will. So we have the first one would be a near linear calibration curve. So these typically, an example of this would be like a John Deere Green Star yield monitor, where they recommend only 1 calibration point, or say that only 1 calibration point is needed, because it's assumed that flow rate and sensor signal is near linear. Nonlinear calibration curve, obviously more loads are needed. Most of the time it's recommended around 6 to 7 actual calibration loads are needed. And the reason why this is because it's not linear. An example of this would be like Case New Holland yield monitors typically are nonlinear, so you need more loads, and it's important to get loads along the range of expected yields in that field. So from low to high, scatter those six loads out along that curve. It really increases improves the fit of that calibration curve when you do that. Calibration plan, you know, always have a plan and know beforehand what type of monitor it is, if it's a linear versus nonlinear, and obviously your manual will tell you that. Typical load size, I always recommend from anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 pounds. On certain monitors, don't forget to calibrate for moisture, header height, temperature, and zero flow. All those are important. Some manuals only recommend when a part is changed or fixed that it be recalibrated, but in certain situations it does not hurt to calibrate at least at the beginning of season, especially for zero flow, the vibration, because that'll change from crop to crop and from year to year. And this is often a step that I see get overlooked. So it is important, and do it. I recommend doing it at least at the beginning of the season for those monitors that let you calibrate for that.
Hey Chad, a question just came in that I think is relevant to what you were just discussing. The question was, should you delete past calibration loads? Do you recommend that?
Okay, Ben. Yeah, good question. Typically, if that error, and most monitors will calculate the percent error. So if that percent error difference from actual to the weighed weight is greater than 3%, I typically will delete those old calibration loads and not use those. So good question. That 3% is kind of what I use as a value. If it's greater than 3%, I delete it and don't use it. If it's under 3, go ahead and leave it in the calibration. Good question. You know, the steps, it's important to select representative areas of the field. Obviously, use common sense. Use common sense when you're calibrating. Don't use turn rows. If there's a side hill or big hill and it's just in part of the field, stay off of that. So use common sense when it starts that. And then always calibrate at the start of the season. You know, the survey poll indicated 44% of people do at the beginning of the season. And I don't wait, because oftentimes when I have clients or even on our own farm, when we wait to do it halfway through the season, it just doesn't get done, and that's what happens most of the time. It just doesn't get done because you don't take time to do it. Just some general rules of thumb on checking calibration. If you start to see in some of your checks, if you start to see a 3 to 5% difference in error, it's time to recalibrate. And I always like to try to check calibration once a week. It sure doesn't hurt, especially as we get later into fall and the weather starts changing. It becomes even more important. And then too, on those monitors where we can calibrate for temperature, if you start to see more than a 10-degree difference or change in daily average temperature, if we calibrate in the end of September here now and we're still harvesting in early November, it might not hurt to calibrate or check that temperature calibration again. And then too, oftentimes, think about test weight changes. And typically the general rule of thumb I use, if you start to see a 4 to 5 pound per bushel change in test weight, it would be a good idea to check that calibration. Also, if you go from hybrids that go from, in the case of corn, seed size or seed shape changes drastically from one hybrid to another, it'd be a good idea to check that calibration.
Hey Chad, we had one more question come in that I think is relevant to this too. The question was, if you have multiple harvesters in the same field, how do you use a benchmark for accuracy, or which combine do you consider right?
Okay, that's a very good question, and that's something that I don't know if I have a really good answer for you. In my experience, when you have multiple combines in the field, I mean, it makes that calibration more important. And if both combines are properly calibrated, in my experience, you should come out pretty close. But there obviously probably will still be a couple bushel difference between those. So you've got to, I guess the best answer there is you just got to use your instinct and go with one and correct the other one to match that. So, but hopefully, if the equipment is all working properly, and also if it's calibrated right, you should come out pretty close. And I would recommend, continue to add calibration loads if one machine is under the other. And if there's a big difference, there's probably something wrong in the sensor. So, but very good question, and that's something that everybody struggled with a long time when we have multiple combines in the field. It does make it tougher. Good questions. Keep them coming. Couple comments on on-farm trials. I always try before harvesting a trial, check a calibration or just totally recalibrate before we start harvesting on-farm trials. When we think about it, is a couple of bushels is typically the difference between treatments. So when we're trying to detect a couple bushel difference, on a field scale, we need to be as accurate as possible. Otherwise, we're going to get the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. We're not going to be able to detect those true differences. And when we do have on-farm trials, back to the comment or question about having multiple combines, always have one combine harvest the entire trial. Don't try to use 2 or multiple combines to harvest that trial if possible. Just stick with one. Just a quick summary of the calibration process. Like I indicated, plan before harvest, know the number of loads, load size, if you can calibrate moisture, temperature, and zero flow on that monitor. Think about your calibration area, and then of course pay special attention to those on-farm trial areas. That data is very valuable. And calibrate, always remember to calibrate at the start of the season, don't wait. And then check once a week. And obviously use common sense when considering changes in weathers, errors, and test weights. If you think you may need to calibrate or check that calibration, do it. Just a few brief points on data management. Check data recording after the first full day of harvest. I don't know how many times I've been into day 2 of harvest and stop by and get the yield data or download the data and there's nothing there. There's nothing more frustrating than going through all that work and then something not getting recorded. It happens almost every year to me. It's usually not the same producer. It's a new one every year, and it's just a weird something weird happens, a glitch, and so make sure you download data at that end of that first day and verify that you're recording that data, and then back up every other day if possible. I know sometimes logistically you can't do this, but teach a farmer, to make a copy of that backup every day or every other day at the end of the day, so you don't lose any of that valuable data. Okay, we'll go ahead and move into the cleaning thing, and this is something that is very important, and especially when we talk here at the end of the presentation or the webinar about the more advanced analysis, the spatial analysis that we can do today, those tools that we have available for us. We've got to have good, clean data going in because it makes that analysis a lot better, and so we can be more confident in our management decisions based on using that clean yield data. When I step back and look at a lot of the software packages, whatever people may be running for their data management and storing that data, creating management zones, a lot of that software will automatically clean that data to some extent. But a lot of us, what I've seen is a lot of us really don't know what it's doing, what points it's deleting, and a lot of us, I think, just assume, and I'm guilty of that too, just assume that it's taking out those data points that are in error. So my one point of advice there, or comment, would be just know what your software does automatically or what the defaults are set for, so you know what points are getting removed and what points aren't. Some software gives you a lot more flexibility in choosing those things, and we'll talk about some of the techniques here in just a little bit. And so, when we look at it, there's basically 10 techniques, and most everybody has heard of these, or at least heard them referred to in conversations probably. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This actually is outlined. All these are outlined on the white paper that you'll be receiving after the conclusion of the webinar. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through each one of these, but I would spend some time reading through that and becoming familiar with these and considering them when you're cleaning your yield data, because it's amazing how much better your yield data will become after taking the time to clean, quote unquote, clean that yield data. This is a tool that a lot of you are probably familiar with. This is actually Yield Editor. It was written or created by USDA ARS, and it actually takes into account those 10 filtering techniques. And as you can see, this is free download. This is something that I try to use as much as possible when cleaning yield data. You can select what techniques you want to use. And it by far is, in my opinion, is the most robust software cleaning package out there. And it lets you set your limits. So say for minimum swath width, you want to use 120 inches, or you can change that if you want. And the nice thing is it actually tells you how many yield data points are deleted, and it'll show you which ones get deleted. So it's nice to be able to see what data points are getting deleted, where in most software packages they're just removed, and I guess you just assume that those truly did need to be deleted. So the typical process that I kind of go through, when at the end of the season, when we have time, is this following flow. Typically, I'll open up most of my data files in FOV viewer, and then import those directly into Yield Editor, and then finally into the data management software. It is not as quick as importing them right into a data management software, whether it be whatever you may be using. but I'd feel a lot more confident at the end of the day knowing that we have high quality yield data and that we got all those data points that were in error clipped out. And both those are free software packages or bundles. So useful tools to have on your computer in the case of cleaning yield data. Just a quick summary on what we covered there. Obviously, back up that yield data as often as possible. Every other day is what I would recommend if possible. And in the FOV viewer and yield editor, it allows you the flexibility to set your ranges easily, and you can view those points that are getting deleted so you know if they should get deleted or not. And spend some time on cleaning. I know it takes time, and you get bombarded with data at the end of the year, but it does pay. It does pay to clean that data.
Hey, Chad, we had another question come in that's right up what you were just discussing. The question was, do you do the cleaning through the USDA program prior to putting it into your software package, like, say, SST or one of the other FMISs?
Yes, good question. Yes, I typically do. That way I know it's clean going in, and I know all the data points that I want removed are removed beforehand. So yeah, it does lengthen the process. It does take a little more time, but I feel more confident in good quality data going in. So good question. The second registration question that you were asked when registering was which best describes how you or your clients use yield monitor data. And the options there were look at yield values as harvest, print and examine yield maps, evaluate average yield against another factor, and evaluate using advanced statistics. This also was quite surprising. 16%, and all of us are guilty of watching while harvesting and making management decisions when we're driving a combine across the field. Looking at the yield monitor is when a lot of management decisions are made. But then 25%, and I think this is where a lot of us are currently, or a lot of our clients are examining yield maps, 25%, and then just evaluating yield averages at 43%. Is what I would like to see is for a lot of this percentage to move up here into the evaluate with statistics, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail here in the following slides. But I think we have a lot of room to grow up here in this statistical analysis range. We don't spend, we used to, when yield monitors first came out, we used to spend time talking about, how are we going to aggregate or group that data together in a number of ranges and color schemes. And I was thinking the other day that this is something that we really have not talked about much, or I haven't heard talked much about in a long time. So I thought I'd just spend a minute or two talking about this. Most software packages, as far as data aggregation, will let you do it in equal count, equal interval, standard deviation, or natural breaks. And you need to keep in mind, because you think that it doesn't matter how you aggregate the data, but it does, because certain instances it may over-exaggerate yield patterns, so it may give a false it may lead you to falsely believe that there's more variability in that field than there actually is. And this can happen with equal count or standard deviation. Those two methods tend to exaggerate yield patterns. The equal interval, it can actually downplay variation a little bit. However, that is the easiest method, for comparing maps. If you want to go, from year to year or from field to field and compare maps, that probably is the best method for that. Natural breaks probably is what the majority of people use, and that's typically what I use. But the one thing to keep in mind there, of course, and everybody's noticed that it's not the same from field to field. So it's based, on those natural breaks are calculated based on your low and high. So yield points. So to keep that in mind, and I would encourage you to change those around on yield maps. To see how that variation changes, and obviously pay attention to the legend and the yield ranges. in those legends. So, most of us are at the point, like the survey indicated, we're kind of what I would call just a glance. The initial interpretation phase is just glance and go. We're gonna look at that yield map at the end of the year, and maybe have a little bit of management decisions based on there, but not much. And then we get into more of our advanced normalizing yields, and then Ag Veritas. We'll talk about that in a little bit greater detail here later. And then the multi-year yield analysis. So I just want to quickly briefly hit on those. Something to always keep in mind is that a yield map only documents the spatial distribution of crop and not what caused that variation, and that's what makes the analytical tools that we now have available even more important, is using those and not just looking at that map. And of course, the yield data is only valuable if we make, if we input that into our management decisions or validate management practices. Picture on the right here is actually a irrigated circle where we can see some water issues or water patterns in this field. So in this case, a glance at it does identify what management practices need to be fixed. We need to work on the nozzling on that sprinkler. Just an example. When we do look at that initial interpretation or that glancing at that yield data, start by investigating the conditions at the highest and lowest yield areas in the field, and this is what most people do already. But really focus on those areas. And then don't sweat the small things, I guess. Make sure that those trends in those fields are significant in acres. If it's an acre in a 130-acre field, it's probably not worth digging into much. So look for large trends when you visually inspect those maps. And obviously, variability in that field can be broken down into two categories. Management practices that cause variability and natural occurring. So straight lines in the field would indicate fertilizer application, hybrid change, seeding rate change, something like that. Then irregular shape breaks obviously would be elevation, soil type, drainage issues, things like that. Okay, for advanced interpretation, and this is where I'd really like to see more and more farmers move into this realm and really start digging into the data a little more, I guess you could say. Something that I always do, or that we always do, is normalize yield at the end of the year. And basically, there's two different methods of doing this. You can divide each yield point by the field average, and this would give you a scale on a percentage basis. This would give you anywhere from say 50 to 150%. And this is the way I prefer, because this really shows you or gives you an indication of what areas in the field are above average and below average. Another method for normalizing would be dividing by the highest yield data point, but this obviously will give you a 0 to 100 scale. So it's not as clear a picture as what is high yielding or above average yielding in the field and what's below averaging yielding in the field. And the next advanced interpretation that I want to talk about briefly is Ag Veritas, and this is an XSInc product, and this is something that excuse me, I'm very excited about. I think it's something that has been missing as far as taking us to that next step of digging into that data further to help answer some of those management-related decisions. And we'll actually have a brief demo. Ben will be giving a brief demo at the conclusion of this, if you're able to stick around. But it's powerful in its diagnostics and to evaluate field-scale trials. The last thing I want to cover is the multi-year yield analysis, and this is kind of the point where once we have 2, 3, 4 years of yield data, we can start running multi-year yield analysis in building management zones. I think this is kind of the end point, or that first, I guess what you maybe would refer to as the first end point, or another stepping stone in that precision ag ladder. And obviously, just like the Most of you are familiar with multi-year yield analysis. So basically we're trying to identify those high yielding and stable areas, medium yield and stabling areas, low yielding and stable, and then unstable areas. So you know, that really, it's really that another step in taking that, using that yield data. Once again, it's got to be good, clean data going in. Otherwise, your zones are not as well defined, and you may have a lot of error involved in that. So just a quick summary. You know, we visit a little bit about collecting yield data, cleaning yield data, initial interpretation of yield data, and then two, let's just spend a few moments on the advanced phases of interpreting data. You know, I just can't stress the importance of using clean yield data, and that's why we thought it was important to cover some of these topics, even though it is a refresher for a lot of you. The importance of taking time to do that and getting us to those, moving into those more advanced phases of interpreting data. So I'd just like to thank you, and remind you that we've got a brief 10-minute, Ben will be given a brief 10-minute Ag Veritas demonstration for those of you that can stick around for the next 5 or 10 minutes. And then also we'll be putting up a poll question if you would like more information on the topic today, or if you have questions that you may think of later today or tomorrow that pop up.
Hey Chad, while we're transitioning to the survey, I just want to mention that we got a lot of good questions in today, and we didn't have time to answer all of them, but I just want to let all the listeners know that Chad will follow up with those questions that we couldn't get to. And we did have one more come in that I wanted to ask you, Chad, and the question was, if you have the ability to weigh the grain coming off the fields, can you calibrate less often since you can post-correct the monitor data?
Good question. Yeah, yes, that is true. You can, and I guess the post-correct or correcting it after the fact, I mean, that works fine. I guess my preference is always to try to do it, what I would say is real time, just because I know it gets done at that point. But that is an option, and I know a lot of guys use that. I guess and maybe I'm anal. I like to like to know it's done up front and is taken care of. But that is an option, yes.
I think we're going to wrap up the survey, and we want to thank you all that took the time to respond. And if now we're going to take about a few minutes to talk about Ag Veritas. If you guys have a few minutes to stick around, we'd really appreciate it. So we're going to quickly go over Ag Veritas and explain kind of what it is and the type of results it produces. And just kind of a high-level overview of what Ag Veritas is it's a web-based yield analysis tool. And what it does is it uses a spatial statistics process to take all the data layers you have for your field, whether it's your hybrid choice or your seeding rate or product applications or nutrient levels, all those data layers that you have for your field that you think might be having some kind of impact on your yield, we take all those factors and analyze them at the same time and tell you the relative impact or which of those factors are really driving your yield more or less relative to each other. And so it seemed like a lot of you, 43% that responded, are using yield averages for your yield analysis. So this is kind of taking, all the factors that you have and showing you, a rank of which ones are really the ones driving your yield. And kind of to take a step back, we didn't invent this process, this type of analysis. It's been done in academic settings for over a decade now. And it was slow and really labor intensive and costly. And, we're XSInc, and we're a software company in the ag industry. And we saw a need for this type of, more robust spatial analysis to be accessible to folks like you. So we brought in PhD statisticians and agronomists, and we created Ag Veritas to automate this process and make it quick, and so folks like you can get and have this type of analysis accessible. And so I'm going to show you guys a example analysis that we ran using Ag Veritas. what we did here, it was a manufacturer-sponsored fungicide trial on a 48-acre cornfield in Ohio. And you can see in the middle image here, it was your classic strip trial, applied versus not applied. And we've included the soil types and the elevation into the analysis, and we're trying to make a decision on, was that fungicide profitable to apply? And if so, where is it profitable to apply? And so it sounds like a lot of you are using yield analysis where you're trying to look at, say, yield by application or yield by soil types. And so this is going to pull all those factors together and let you know where that fungicide is working the most and where it's paying. And so before I jump into the results, just looking at the bottom box here, if you did a more traditional analysis or a comparison of averages of where the fungicide was applied versus not applied, the area that had the fungicide averaged about 8 bushels an acre higher than the area without the fungicide. So you might look at that and think to go ahead and apply the fungicide to the whole field. But as you probably can expect, it's not as cut and dry as that. And so now I'll go ahead and jump into the Ag Veritas site. And this is the analysis results for that field I just showed you guys. And this first page is the summary page, and it shows you an overview of your yield, the variability of your yield as shown here and as shown on the histogram to the right here, as well as the various factors that you include in the analysis. And the bar next to each of those factors shows you the relative impact that each of these data layers is having on your yield. And so the next page of the analysis is the spatial effects map. And what spatial effects are, these are areas where the yield was abnormally high or low on your field due to some unknown factor, or even after we've accounted for the impact that all the data layers you included in the analysis are having on your yield, these areas are still yielding abnormally high or low, so much so that we're confident there's something else going on there that's causing that abnormally high or low yield. So some examples may be deer damage or an underground pipe that leaks moisture. You wouldn't have a data layer for these areas, but it's important to account for them in an analysis. And so if you think back to that manufacturer-sponsored fungicide trial or the analysis we're looking at, if a strip had run straight through this positive spatial effect area, you may think that abnormally high yield was due to the fungicide when we're confident that even after we've accounted for the impact that the fungicide and the elevation and the soil types is having on the yield, that area is still yielding abnormally high due to some other factor. And so you may wrongfully attribute that higher yield to the fungicide when in fact it's due to something else. And another benefit of being able to identify these spatial effect areas and see them on a map like this is that you may know what some of these areas are when you're familiar with the field that you're looking at, but oftentimes people who see these results don't know, what some of these areas are, and it gives you a chance to walk your field with your grower, inspect these areas, and maybe try to minimize some of these negative impacts for next year. And so, kind of along those lines, this next page is the comparison table, and you guys are probably used to looking at data kind of like this, and what the comparison table is showing you here is that fungicide application by different elevation ranges here. And the top number is the yield in bushels per acre, and the bottom number in each box is the total acreage for that area. And you can see that over to the left next to spatial effects, I've selected all. So what that means is we're looking at the whole field. We're not accounting for those spatial effect areas. And looking at the results, this right-hand column shows you the bushel per acre increase by applying that fungicide at that, in this case, at that elevation. And so it looks like when we aren't accounting for those spatial effects, that fungicide is having a pretty positive impact at almost all the elevations, even at the higher ones. And so what I'm going to do here is next to spatial effects, select none. And what that means now is now we're accounting for those spatial effect areas. We're accounting for those sort of outlier areas in the analysis. And you can see how the trend changes. Now we see less of a return or less of an increase in yield at these lower elevations. But as we get to the higher elevations, that the increase decreases and almost becomes negligible at the highest elevations. And so you can see that the numbers and the bushels per acre, the results change drastically when you don't account for these spatial effects. And so being able to account for them really gives you the most accurate analysis possible. And so as you guys are sure used to seeing as you're doing your analysis, if you switch to a different soil type, the results also can change. And in this case, we're looking at a different soil type on the field, and it looks like even at the higher elevations, you're seeing pretty high positive returns or pretty high yield increases from that fungicide. And so just to kind of take a step back, if your goal is to find out, where is the fungicide working, where is it most profitable to apply, you'd have to look at each combination of soil type by each elevation range, applied versus not applied, and you can see that it quickly becomes hard to overlay all those data layers to get the final quick answer on was it profitable, and if so, where. And so that's why we designed this fourth page, the profit map. And what it does is it gives you a quick actionable answer on where you can target those investment choices. So you put in a few criteria on the profit map here. So it was a cornfield, so I'll put $4 in for the price of corn. And we're going to evaluate that fungicide application at a price of about $22 an acre instead of applying nothing at all. And we'll hit that calculate button, and while the map's loading, you'll see this color-coded key here on the left. And what that's showing is each color represents a different estimated return on your investment by applying, in this case, that fungicide. And underneath the return on the investment, we show you the estimated bushel per acre increase by applying that fungicide at that location. And so I'll zoom in here so you can see it a little bit better. But thinking back to the last slide we saw on that PowerPoint that I showed you, it's 8 bushels an acre on average that the fungicide, where the areas that had the fungicide yielded higher. But it's not really 8 bushels an acre across the whole field. In some areas it's almost 17 bushels an acre, and in other areas it's less than 5. And so especially with corn prices falling, it's more important than ever to really target these applications to where they're going to give you the most return on your investment and not where they won't pay. And so I'd like to kind of just conclude here. Ag Veritas, it identifies the factors that have the most impact on your yield. And that screenshot on the right shows you, you see which of the factors that are driving your yield and which ones are really explaining the most of your yield. And based on that knowledge, you can use it to manage your factors and really base those management decisions off of which of those data layers are really having the most impact on your yield. And Ag Veritas also identifies those spatial effect areas so that you can inspect those areas and maybe minimize what was going on there next year. And then we also account for them in the analysis. And like we saw, when you're able to account for them, you're able to get a much more accurate result than you are when you're not able to account for these areas. And finally, you can feel comfortable basing your management decisions and targeting those applications for your highest return on the investment because of the accuracy of the spatial analysis and that identification and accounting for those spatial effect areas. And so I'll conclude there, and I want to thank you all again for taking the time to come and attend this webinar. And we'll be sending you guys a follow-up email with the PowerPoint from Chad's presentation, as well as a recording of this webinar, the white paper that Chad wrote before this presentation, as well as a survey, because we'd really love your guys' feedback about this presentation and future ones as well. And so we'll conclude there, and I want to thank you all again.